for all these small confusions. I remember when I was young reading James Bond novel Goldfinger, where at the beginning there is a quote, proverb, once is a chance, 2 times when something happens is a coincidence, 3 times is an enemy action. So I think so many of these incidents here, yes, there must be something like Stasi in a new guise. Maybe we should call them to discover the plot. No, sorry, thank you.
Okay. And we have this for you.
Listen, I'm a Leninist, and Lenin said, democracy yes, anarchy no, which I read as democracy yes, if you know who is the boss. So, who is the boss here? Mladen, would you? No, I'm
Timothy,
serious. We need a moderator, and it shouldn't be me because I talk too much. So. You also is not good because we want to grill you to ask. You should talk a lot. So, would you, Mladen?
I can moderate if needs be, yes. Welcome all for this final act. I sit down. I think it's been very intense 3 days. I hope, well, you attended lectures, but I particularly hope you saw the movies. This is the really important part to get Lubitsch back on the map in Berlin. And I hope that this event will instigate a continuation, that this is not a sort of one-time thing, but that the presence of Lubitsch in Berlin will be inspired, I mean, will take some cue from this event and continue in the years to come. We were all thrilled to come here, the first Lubitsch event in Berlin, and it's kind of absurd that the first serious Lubitsch things happened in Ljubljana, of all places, in kind of really...
It's absurd, it's only normal.
It's, well, as I already explained, it's only normal because Ljubljana, Slovenia is the closest to this Lubitsch land like Ruritania or Varsovia or, you know, these imaginary Middle European countries. If you look at the map of Europe, you can see that Slovenia is the place which most closely matches this kind of imaginary, preposterous imaginary country. So, but yes, bringing Lubitsch to Berlin was absolutely essential. And I don't know how to moderate this. I would actually like James to begin. I mean, yes, no, your book on the romantic comedy in Hollywood is like a Bible for anyone who has done any studies in this, in Lubitsch and Preston Sturges in that particular period. And you had a great opening in the beginning, and then we didn't hear your voice through the conference. So I was wondering, could you perhaps begin with some reflections or what you thought was...
Stimulate him. Can I just make a short remark praising you? I will tell you. I hope most of you know Columbo. I don't like it, but it's a TV series, Peter Hall. And there is something very mysterious in that series. There is how a murder happens, Columbo, inspector, arrives on the scene, and in a mysterious way, he immediately knows who is the murderer. And then we also know, and then the whole point is how will he demonstrate. Okay, let's say Lubitsch is our corpse, and for us in Slovenia, he was our Columbo. In the sense that we watch a movie, we don't know what happened there, we look into his book, and he tells us this happens in this, with a minimum of understanding, then we can play our games. We interpret it in this way or that, but to know what you see, you know, I'm almost tempted to, once I quoted a passage from you, and somebody told me, but it's not quite that in the movie. And I defended you with a paraphrase of Marx Brothers' Groucho joke. I said, whom do you believe, your eyes or James Harvey? And the answer was clear. Sorry for this, but I had to say it. Sorry. Please go on.
Well, Slavoj
promised me that you were going to grill me, and that's where I'd like to go. I mean,
Yeah, but I want to calm you down. We are the Stalinist troika, but we are Stalinists with a human face.
oh, I know that.
Go to
Yeah,
Gulag,
about the human face,
you will
I know.
get enough cabbage soup there and all that, not to start.
No, it's
Please,
been.
go on.
I just want to say how grateful I am to the conference and to Kino Babylon and to my Slovenian friends now to be here, and it's a great honor and a great tribute, and I'm in love with everybody I meet, and so it's just been an
Okay, be careful when you say, I love you all. You know here who was the last to say this? Erich Milke. You remember? You know,
I love individuals that I've met. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know about you people.
Let James talk.
No, I don't. No.
Play the analyst. The analysts keep silent.
That's why I'm not an analyst. Can you imagine me listening to someone for hours? No.
You had practice at that today, Slavoj. But anyway, so the book was written, I began to write it 30 years ago, and so it's a return. For me, it's been a return to an old subject. I don't, as I said in my opening speech at the Friday night, that I don't think about Lubitsch much anymore because I've gone on to other interests in film. And, though I've written 2 more books, and they're quite. Each one is quite different. I think of them, the 3 of the books that I've so far written, as being like one book of progress through different experiences in film. And as I said in my opening, I'm more interested in Robert Bresson now than I am in the great comic artists. But I mean, I never abandoned those. I just haven't those artists. But they were earlier in my life, and now, and to come back to by invitation, to come back to talking about and thinking about those early enthusiasms of mine, which I've never changed my mind about, has been very, very interesting to me, and it's been, of course, with so much encouragement from the people in the conference. So that's where I am, and I'm back thinking about Lubitsch in a very intensive way, and that has been extraordinary experience, a great experience. The book is about the progress from Lubitsch through the great romantic comedies, which in many ways certainly equaled his great achievements and in some ways outdid them finally. But movies like The Awful Truth, if you know that, that's a great important film, and also His Girl Friday, and but the book moves through the 30s and 40s to an artist equally as great as Lubitsch, Preston Sturges, who may not be so well known here, but he's an extraordinary artist, and his movies are extraordinary. But it's that progress that interested me then and still does, and especially thinking about it again and talking about it with my new friends here. So it's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So, questions?
Slavoj, you promised some grilling of James. Do you have any?
Now I'm in a humanist mood, not people enjoy their life, they shouldn't suffer, and even saying this makes me almost throw up, you know. But okay, just to start the conversation. When you mentioned that for Ninochka, Lubitsch effectively visited Moscow, and how he was impressed by some details and so on. We don't have time to go into it now, it doesn't concern directly Lubitsch, but I read a very good analysis of strict parallels between, of course they were totally different, between Soviet cinema and American cinema in the 30s. In United States you get Hays Code, in Soviet Union, you had, of course, strict Lubitsch level almost of these material details. Hollywood rules were even more severe. For example, when they were doing in the 30s a couple of movies about poverty, economic crisis, and so on, the rule was not to show the dirt, the poverty as so that you feel how bad it smells or whatever. Like, even if it's a slum, you notice that the floor is always clean and so on, all that. Second thing, this mutual admiration. Do you know, I hope you do, which wonderful anecdote. The origin of, I read it in a book on the movie, I'm not inventing it. The origin of King Kong iconic scene. In the late 20s, a group of American producers, movie makers, visited Moscow. And they met there the last of these great formalist constructivist architects. And they were shown that famous project of, mega project, Palace of Soviet, on the top, gigantic Lenin statues. And Mountain said, my God, you put an ape on it, we have model for, it was literally and also the tremendous admiration of Soviet cinema for Hollywood. When one of the, an enemy of Eisenstein, visited Hollywood and said, but this is what we want. Everything is strictly planned, subdivisions, you have, you know, work is divided, you have specialists who are just looking for good jokes, for good quotes. So it was this, and in one of my movies, I go even further. That what for a long time I thought it's a specificity of Hollywood, this production of a couple, even it was mentioned here, how the obscenity, I think you mentioned it, Alenka, Warren Beatty's Reds, you know how October Revolution happens. They have a lover's quarrel, Diane Keaton and Warren Beatty, and then he makes a speech, she looks at him in desire, and then literally the iconic scenes of October Revolution are how to call it, intercut or whatever, with the two of them making love. So, although we know it's a movie about October Revolution, but the subliminal message is October Revolution took place to reconcile sexually an American couple. Now, the surprise is that, and with all these movies, for example, even that about the end of the world, Mimi Lederer, what's that stupid movie? No. Where, again, an asteroid threatens to kill the Earth. But it's always a metaphor, asteroid, for some love triangle. Okay, but I was surprised. The greatest Stalinist spectacle, you should see it, The Fall of Berlin. It's a story incredible. At the beginning of the movie, sorry, it's worth saying. At the beginning of the movie, a model kolkhoz worker is in love with a local teacher, lady. He's too ashamed to approach her. So he gets an invitation to Moscow, he gets some Stalin prize. There he meets Stalin and asks him, Stalin asks him, his father, why are you so nervous, comrade? He says, oh, I'm in love. And then Stalin gives him advice. Quote this poem to the lady and so on. And then you have the scene where the two embrace. At that point, Germany attacks Soviet Union. They are separated, and the whole movie is in a very Hollywood way. She is prisoner in Germany. He joins the Red Army, basically to get his girl back. And the end is an absolute obscenity. In Berlin, the two are looking for each other in the crowd. Then a plane with Stalin lands there, and Stalin steps out, and he looks at, or she, I don't know, at Stalin, and Stalin looks in a certain direction, and there she is. Stalin reunites the couple, and the lady steps towards Stalin and said, "Thank you, Comrade Stalin, for bringing me my lover back. Can I give you a kiss?" And so on and so on. It even Stalinism was not immune from this, but I want to not to get lost in this. But you mentioned that how you are now more in this spiritual experience, in the sense of, not in a cheap sense, this basic kindness, openness towards people, how you describe it. And you mentioned the name Tarkovsky. Okay, I mean, if you ask me frankly, like Stalker is one of the, at the formal level, wonderful film. But nonetheless, I have a problem there. Do you have, is this simply a difference, or do you have any way to bring, or to use the Hegelian term, to mediate Tarkovsky with Lubitsch? Or it's just a cut, a difference? Because for me, a little bit of Lubitsch touch wouldn't have hurt Tarkovsky. I don't like this ultra metaphysical depth and so on, you know. Sorry, just to finish, would you agree with me here, then I will really finish. Because when you mentioned also these big European art movies from early 50s especially, I'm sorry to tell you, but many of them today, at least for me, no longer work. Like Rossellini, Stromboli. It's such a pretentious fake if you watch it today. Or even Bergman. Silence still works, but cries and whispers persona. There is something fake about that. Again, a Lubitsch touch wouldn't have hurt them. So do you also have problems? Also along the lines that, you know, what was celebrated as mega European art, much of it didn't pass the test of time. So how do you relate to all this? Now I really shut up.
Here's the point where the moderator should step in and moderate.
Well, I was going to answer.
Yes, sure.
The problem, Slavoj, for me, I mean, a joke would destroy Tarkovsky. I mean, a Lubitsch touch would destroy.
Isn't this bad for him?
What?
Isn't this, I'm sorry.
No.
How do you say it in German? I was told that the appropriate, extremely vulgar expression for what I am now is Fotzengedicht or what. I'm sorry, but isn't this a horrible thing to say for Tarkovsky?
Yeah. I think it's even worse in the case of Lubitsch. I mean, Bresson. I mean, Bresson is maybe the most humorless filmmaker who ever. Yeah.
Mistake, by the way.
And when I think about, as I did before coming to this conference, about the distance between the a successful Bressonian experience, not all of them are successful for me by any means, and a successful Lubitsch film, a great Lubitsch film. I mean, it's just clear that for an artist like Bresson, and I would include Tarkovsky, and if this isn't too simple, I mean, the issues are too urgent. You know, there are times when a Lubitsch touch could be obscene because you're in some other area of your life and your consciousness and your political, I hope, activity, and you don't want jokes. And I think that's true of Bresson. My favorite movie, as I said in my last book of all time, is O Hazar Balthazar, and by Bresson. And if you haven't seen it, you really should. It's a magnificent, beyond words experience for me. I know we all have different such experiences, happily, but it's not. I mean, you can sit through sometimes the kind of seriousness that Bresson represents and enacts on film doesn't work. It just doesn't work, and that's true for me. Like in Infâme Douce, one of his first color films, I think something happened to him as an artist. Color never really suited him until his, well, in 2 movies, I think it did, Lancelot and L'Argent, which is, I think, a truly great movie. But he had problems with color, and his vision was, in some sense, black and white, and you could say that's a metaphor for excluding humor or that way of looking at life. But that way of looking at life is, Lubitsch's way of looking at life as something that has limits, and we should face them. We should not beat ourselves up about them, but we should deal with them. And that was Lubitsch. Bresson is not talking about life in that way, and also he is talking about, in one of his least successful films, Le Diable Probablement, he's talking about the end of the world. He's talking about the fact that we are destroying the planet, and he obviously there are actual sort of newsreel scenes of that going on. And that's what's going on for us now, and it's urgent, just as the state of our democracies is absolutely urgent and terrifying at this time, in my view. Partly thanks to my country, importantly thanks to my country, but not only there. I mean, you don't want to go to an active meeting about doing something about this and have people make jokes about how foolish you might look or be, or though some of them inspire jokes, I must say. An anecdote. In New York, where I live, I thought I would join the resistance. I have a button on my jacket. It says resist. Big deal. Anyway, and I felt out of place, and then they said, well, we have to make decisions. Our group has to make decisions. It was a large group. I mean, it was easy to feel out of place because there's so many people. But they were all, anyway. And they took three or four more meetings to come up with their name. What name should we give ourselves? This is the media age, and of course, and when I got an email saying that the name they had chosen was the creative resistance, I thought, fuck creative. I mean, it's just absolutely. I'm not going to be creative.
Great.
I never went back, and that might have been a mistake because I'm sure they do good things, but it's kind of. Anyway, that was my joke. That's how I got into that anecdote. I mean, that was my. But on the other hand, if they were really doing something urgent and the situation was urgent, that would be an inappropriate response of mine. But I took some pleasure and some self-satisfaction in having that joke away from the group. Anyway, I think I don't ask. I don't want Tarkovsky and Bresson to be funny. I don't ask that of them, Slavoj. I don't. And I had an opposite experience to yours. When you were young and first saw these films like Rossellini's Stromboli. When I was young, I just scoffed it. I mean, oh, come on, this is this is really bad, dumb, bad filmmaking, and certainly not funny ever. And then I changed my mind. I decided that people who talked about the Rossellini Bergman films, which are very dull and badly acted and so on, so all that, the Stromboli and Voyage to Italy and whatever. And I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong, and because I knew so many people who admired them, the people whom I respected, and so I actually, in my last book, I write a whole chapter about the Bergman-Rossellini films, which I take a complicated view of them. I mean, they're not fun, God knows, but they're certainly not funny, but they are interesting. And when I read other critics, I thought, yeah, I see what they're getting at. And then it was a process of changing my mind that took place over time. And I can't ever say that but I love them, but I understand them in that way. I don't just say, oh, you know, he lost it, which it looked like to me at the time, you know, when I first saw those films. And that's true of many other art films, in my experience. I'm not recommending it, but that's what happened to me. And I have come to love, not so much the Rossellini films, but I have a long chapter about them. But Dreyer, Carl Dreyer, who is one of my favorite filmmakers, and I always loved Passion of Joan of Arc, always, and never any interruption in that. But when I was young, I saw Day of Wrath, and I wasn't into art films then, and I saw it on first run in Chicago. And I was bowled over by it, absolutely, as I was by Balthazar when I first saw that. And that led me into films I didn't right away like, which was the last one. I think Gertrude is a marvelous film, and very boring and very humorless, but wonderful. And also, man, the film about, I'm sorry, I'm jet lagged still, but the overtly religious film about the band, the woman raised from the dead. What is? The Word. Pardon?
The Word.
The Word. The Word.
Yes. Yeah, it has another name in English, in America anyway. Yes. Anyway, that was clearly a hard to take film when I first saw it. You know, I mean, the religiosity and the specificity of the evangelical sects and so on, and the lack of humor, God knows, except there was a little there, you could argue. And Gertrude is, anyway, the thing is, I learned to change, learned to like those films, and now I like them enormously. I'm totally convinced that they are wonderful. They're wonderful for me now. So, I mean, it's not a question of that first experience of being overwhelmed, as movies tend to do when they work for us, but also, it's also a question of learning what they're about that you didn't see especially in your youthful arrogance. You know, I was all my friends were people who go with me to the movies and make fun of them. You know, ordinary movies. That was a big pastime for movie going in my day. So I used to laugh, as I say in another book. I used to go to Douglas Sirk movies just to make fun of them because they seemed so awful to me and stupid and predictable. I'm a big Douglas Sirk fan. I mean, I learned. I mean, it was written on the wind on television that I thought, you know, I kept watching out of a kind of fascination and imitation of life, which I particularly loathed when I first saw it. You know, my God, you know, my mother liked it. You know, it was that was not surprising. And I've written a lot about Sirk and so forth. I think that's important in life, to change your mind. And when you get to be my age or around my age, you look back on it and it's all a little different. You understand things you didn't understand at the time. And that's very interesting. I missed that, or I didn't understand that when that happened, or I didn't understand that when I first saw that.
Did you see Douglas Sirk when he was still his two big melodramas from mid-30s with Zarah Leander? Douglas Sirk?
Oh yes, I saw those, yeah.
I love those almost more than his.
Yeah, well, I saw the films, but I never wrote about them, or thought about them that much. It was the Hollywood films that I saw.
Maybe you should keep a bit to Lubitsch, to the topic, so as not to make the whole cinema history. And well, by the way, I love Stromboli and Voyage to Italy. Maybe there's a disagreement about this, but anyway, I was going to bring up another topic, which is there were there's a paradox. I mean, two papers in the conference, Alenka's and Aaron's, defended Lubitsch as a revolutionary, as it were, which is the most unlikely kind of, he's a very unlikely revolutionary. A revolution in Ninotchka, and then this very unexpected turn to the Spartacus revolution in Austerprinzessin, which is, you know, and you have on the one hand the potentially revolutionary Lubitsch, and then on the other hand, several papers pointed out the, let's say, the grand style, the necessity of grand style. It all happens, very often happens in this high circles where the style is the thing, the bubbly champagne kind of settings, and the question of manners and politeness, which particularly Slavoj insisted on this. How do the two things go together? The Lubitsch, the revolutionary, Lubitsch, the defender of manners, politeness, style. Are there two sides of the same coin? How, is there contradiction between the two, or should one defend both somehow?
I don't think Lubitsch the revolutionary exists. No.
Well,
I mean, I understand your point of view, Mladen, but I think he went along with what was going on as much as he could. And I was talking to Slavoj earlier about this. He had to make it in Hollywood, and at a time when Hollywood was very limited in what you could say or do, and you certainly could not. I was talking earlier with Slavoj about this, but Lubitsch, I think, made some very crude movies earlier on. Anyway, he had early on, when the movies now that he made that looked overdone and not, you know, too much to be funny, not yet, too excessive to be funny, comedies and so forth, and then the romanticism of the historical films in Germany. But that Lubitsch was recognized, in spite of his early American films, which were silents made for Warner Brothers, he was recognized by highbrow critics, such as they existed at that time, talking about movies. He was recognized as one of us, and that was because Lubitsch's movies were so, in contrast to most everything else coming out of Hollywood, but Lubitsch movies were so smart. They were so clever. I mean, people had not seen that before in the movies. They didn't expect movies to be subtle, you know, or indirect, but they recognized in those early Warner Brothers movies, which were all like marriage comedies, as you know, and they were also kind of dark and unpleasant in many ways to the contemporary audiences. Anyway, and Lubitsch, when other filmmakers with big reputations were being dismissed by people who wrote about movies, Lubitsch never quite was, and even though the movies weren't substantively that different or that subversive or revolutionary, they were in line with the way people accepted to think about touchy issues. They were conventional, really, on the surface. People recognized beneath that, audiences and critics recognized beneath that surface there was a sneak. You know, someone who was like, you know, not quite, was with the people who knew better. He had, and I say in my book that he had the imagination of a subversive. He had the imagination of a dissident. And the movie that Slavoj and I were talking about earlier today, the movie called Broken Lullaby, but The Man I Killed, is really, it's a movie that, of a kind, after the First World War, and then sound came in the early 30s, and you know, movies, as in the Second World War, American movies championed the war, with some exceptions who paid for it. But Lubitsch, at the time he made The Man I Killed, the movie's called, which is a melodrama, not meant for laughs. It's a serious movie He intended to make a reputation in Hollywood as a serious filmmaker, so he made a movie with a serious subject, which at that time, at the time of The Man I Killed, was an acceptable serious subject, because it was around the same time of other anti-war movies which said, oh, didn't say it quite like this, but in effect said, we were wrong about that war. We take it back. You know, and that was acceptable at the time to the powers that rule the audience and the audiences themselves. And Lubitsch's movies, in contrast to all Quiet on the Western Front, Lubitsch's movie is really about what the original title, which the studio changed right away to something called Broken Lullaby. It sounded okay. We could see that. That won't harm us. But the original title was The Man I Killed, and it is a movie in which the point is that war is not about ideals. It's about fucking killing somebody. Somebody's life. You take somebody's life, and that's what it's about. And it's also about, the movie is hard to see, but I recommend it strongly. It's a very strange movie and not quite successful, but for me it was fascinating because it bore onto the question of, is he subversive in any way? And it's the movie where, and the thing is, it's not just about the fact, the obvious fact, which meant most of the time we don't face, because the hero actually kills a man. It was remade in a French version, which is not very good, but anyway, recently. France, yeah. And we see on the screen, he kills a man face to face in the trenches. This hero does. And then he goes to confession to a priest and says how guilty he feels, and the priest collaborates or encourages him in the idea that he should go and meet the man's family. But he does that, and he goes to France. Germany, I'm sorry. He goes to Germany, and that's the plot of it. And then he falls in love with the man's fiancée, the survivor, and the parents are delighted because he says, "I knew your son." And if you've seen France, you know this story. But anyway, it's a movie in which not only does he have a face-to-face killing of another human being, a sympathetic, even at that moment, a sympathetic figure, but he also Lionel Barrymore, who plays the father, who was very happy to have his son's best good friend, not knowing that he was the one who killed his son, of course, there. And then he never finds out, by the way, in the movie. That was the thing that's, at the son is convinced by the daughter or the would-be daughter-in-law that he can't tell these parents what let me finish. Yeah.
Couldn't you give shorter answers? I mean, that's a monologue.
What?
To do short answers?
Yeah, I mean, just talk something a bit more together. So you're for there.
I will take this. I am much more guilty of this.
Finish this point, and then I'll be shorter. What Lubitsch also resolves the film when the father says he sees bitterly real the war, and the father says, "Father, the people who send their sons to war are the fathers. The fathers kill their sons. The fathers murder their sons, and of course, this is my reading of it. It's part, and we understand the point being that fathers want to murder their sons. I mean, their sons are their successors, and they're not at best mixed feelings about turning things over. And one of the things they do is the implied point of this movie is that they send them to war. And then there's lots of shots of fake cripples, and so forth, and fake. Anyway, It's a movie which doesn't violate any of the code or challenge any of it, except implicitly, indirectly, as Lubitsch was famous for, and I think maybe unconsciously. I don't know what Lubitsch thought he was doing or how daring he thought he was being, but he did it, and it showed who he was in a way that is in tune with the comedies. Okay, I'm finished.
Okay, by bringing out the revolutionary side of Lubitsch, of course, I didn't mean that he would ever explicitly do this, but there is his very subtle and implicit ways of being very subversive and indeed hinting at the radical politics that might be somehow extracted from his movies. Yeah. And so no, I was trying to point out this sort of paradox of the subversive, revolutionary underside of Lubitsch, and then the question of manners, politeness, the style, etc. I don't know, Alenka, maybe I point this question to you. You were the one who somehow, it was extremely funny, the way that you made the connection between the Spartacist revolution and this very unlikely image, the Austrian princess.
No, but perhaps one way of answering your question would be to go back to what James was talking about before. Namely, I'm absolutely convinced, of course, that there are things very interesting that are not funny. This is not, I mean, I don't know if we are Lubitsch fans that we should like just demand comedy in order for anything to be interesting. But there is, however, perhaps a crucial issue that is slightly different here, which is it really that we can say that there are times for people like Bresson or I want to see like Dreyer and so on, and times for like comedy? Is it really that in the times we live in now, we should somehow stop the comedy? Because I think this is very much what we are asked to do. Very often, I think this is part of the issues that came up during the debate, including what Slavoj was talking. For instance, there is this idea, particularly, I would say, on the contemporary left, that now that we have Trump and some other things are so urgent and serious that not only no comedies, but even certain questioning of certain things, or even like, joking about it, this is off limits. Because if you do it, you immediately kind of go in bed with your enemy. You support objectively, you support this. So I think this is a serious issue. I'm not saying that it's like easily decided, but it is a question which nevertheless, I think, could lead one to ask whether it is not precisely a certain lack of comedy within the revolutionaries that screwed up the revolution. that there is something that sometimes I think people, even if you're precisely when you're that serious, and if you think that matters are urgent, to introduce a certain, let's call it Lubitsch touch, does not necessarily mean to get less serious, but it could mean to precisely give you the breath to take it seriously and to carry it after a certain point, which usually stops very soon. You have some protests, and then when some comedy of organizing things should take place, everybody steps down and says, okay, this is comedy now. Of course, it is, like you mentioned, probably the names and everything like this, but perhaps if we really want to be revolutionaries today, we should be able to take some comedy of it also, or something like this. Perhaps. I don't know.
Talk too much. At least. No, let's play democracy, my God. Please.
Okay.
You were so oppressed by all of us talking all the time. I mean.
Yes, we want to hear some voices, some reactions to the conference in various ways. Yes.
I would like to say something about this issue of and with respect to Stalinism and communism, even in Germany. You're very much into Lubitsch in Slovenia, and I think you should go further. You should perhaps think about something that would be nice, something like a Lubitsch test. So that would be a critical tool that you could use in order to condemn one movie with respect to the other because it didn't pass the test. And then you know, perhaps that could be something very nice, and you can throw a story in. And if there is a Lubitsch test for a movie from the past, that test would be that it shows you in some way what those times were, and it's fascinating for us. And for instance, if you look in Ninochka, and I think that's where it was so great, at one point, you have a scene where these two communist guys from Moscow, they are waiting for someone, the girl, Greta Garbo, the agent from Moscow to come, and what happens is that they see a man, and they say, oh, he looks like a commissar from Moscow. And then, you know, they look at him, and he says, Heil Hitler, to someone who came to see. And I think, I mean, he was so right, you know, in terms of giving this idea. But he was doing it just because he was thinking this was true. And I think Lubitsch is someone who would have very easily gone into tragedy, but he's sort of keeping inside, you know, most of his films from that drive. There is one movie where you can clearly see that it goes into tragedy. That's Madame du Barry. The beginning of the movie, you have these funny Lubitsch things. The second part of the movie is tragedy. There is nothing funny about it. And he does it so well. And I think perhaps that's the real Lubitsch, you know, this sense of tragedy, because probably he believes in cure, he believes in love.
Slavoj already proposed a kind of Lubitsch test when, in the beginning of his lecture yesterday, like, the question is not what is Lubitsch for us, how do we appreciate his movies, but what would be for him? Would the movies today pass the Lubitsch test? I don't think many would. Comedy is an extremely volatile creature. There is no test for what is a good comedy. Yes.
I would love so much to have more time for this. The point you touched, okay, I will openly state my disagreement with you. Not that Stalinism was any better or what. I don't play these dirty games there obscene. But I claim that precisely that scene, oh, this must be one of us, Heil Hitler and so on, is practically and theoretically wrong. No, because I think this parallel, the same totalitarians and so on, they're basically the same, again, is not true, pathetically not true. The two universes are so radically different. Just, I developed this in my book. Let me give you just 2-3 obvious examples. You have in Stalinism show trials, you know. People, of course, tortured, blackmailed, you confess, Bukharin, all those trials. Did you notice that you cannot even imagine this in Nazism? There were no big trials against the Jews, and then a leading Jew would admit, yes, we were planning to destroy, or another thing. I read in Anna Applebaum's book on Gulag that every year on Stalin's birthday, in the worst of Gulag, Kolyma, Magadan, they collected, assembled all the prisoners, and they had to sign a telegram to Stalin, wishing him all the best, and so on and so on. You cannot even imagine the same thing in Auschwitz, that they would collect all the Jews. It's a different universe. And also the figure of the leader is different. For example, I'm sorry, I overused this example and I will stop immediately, but were you, I hope, careful to notice this. If you look at old documentaries, when Hitler gives a speech, people applaud, and he receives the applause. Stalin, or a Stalinist leader, always stands up and joins the applause. It's crucial. It means I'm not a leader, I'm like you, a servant of the people. I'm not saying this is best. Maybe at the level of human suffering, Stalinism was even worse. The terror was much more irrational. But I was always suspicious of this quick equation. Like, no, they are not the same. They are radically different. And for me, the biggest scandal of Frankfurt School was that with all their obsession on fascism, they didn't even provide an attempt, okay, Marcuse, Soviet Marxism, but it doesn't do the work of Stalinism. In Stalinism, you get a true dialectic der Aufklärung. Bolshevism was a project of enlightenment, in contrast to fascism. How could that one have gone so wrong? We still need a proper interpretation of the incredible horrors of Stalinism. So again, while I agree with you, of course, both are horrible, but maybe more than ever, it's important to see the radical difference. But okay, we don't have time now, I stop. Okay. And there is that...
one very brief, just what I was saying, very brief, just because perhaps it kind of came across as if I involved in some kind of polemics with you, but actually what I said, I was directly inspired by precisely what you say in your book on the difference between Capra and Sturgis, where Sturgis, Capra at some point when times are really hard, kind of gives in to this sentimental, in his case, sentimental, serious approach. So let's drop the comedy, so we will sympathize with the poor because we cannot. And this is precisely where he misses the point, as opposed to Sturgis, who does not give in this sense, but kind of succeeds to make a rather more serious issue out of it than if he would just. So this is kind of the inspiration came from you there.
I just want to go back quickly to Slavoj's question. Is there a point of mediation between Tarkovsky and Lubitsch? I think for any cinephile that just sounds insane. You can bring them together. But actually, I think there is with the French Catholic newspaper. Tarkovsky says, I don't show sex in my films. Like I don't portray sex or the love act in my films. Not because of some moral reasons, not because I'm against it or I'm prudish, but because I think it's impossible to show cinematically. You cannot represent it cinematically. Therefore, whenever there's a sex scene, I put a scene of levitation. The most famous one being in Zerkalo, in the mirror, also in Solaris. I think I saw on the Facebook site of Babylon, they're using this very image of the levitation. So what's interesting is that Tarkovsky turns that impossibility into an object of like theological wonder. So that impossibility of sex becomes a kind of theological object, whereas I think Lubitsch takes the same impossibility, but he turns it into a comic object because he shows the possibility in that impossibility with all these weird objects. It's not in Lubitsch. See, what's interesting, and this came out very clearly in Alenka's lecture in the last session, also in Yuval's lecture, that it's not in Lubitsch that sexuality is something that we know, that you can either approach indirectly, or you can just be obscene and approach it directly. If it's at that level, that's not really the Lubitsch touch, just to be elusive or indirect. It becomes the Lubitsch touch when the very indirection, or the very form of approach, is the thing itself. Is the thing itself. But that's why I think there actually, bizarrely, is a very interesting link. In a way, Tarkovsky and Lubitsch would agree, and yet sexuality is something that you can't directly present, and that's kind of an interesting lesson. But they have totally different modes of showing that. Totally
one line comment, then I will shut up, if you will give me. You know what? There are another sheer difference. Okay, really. Can you imagine? I was shocked at it. A more anti-feminist movie than Solaris. It's a nightmare. The whole story is that the man is haunted by a dead wife, and how to change her, how to get rid of her to reconcile with the husband. Sorry, but for me, Solaris is Otto Weininger. Take it to movies, so there is a difference here, and okay, now I will manipulate with me. I spoke with people who knew Tarkovsky. And they confirmed this to me. He was horrified. He really believes in a quite naive way that women, if they are not mothers, are source of disturbance and evil. Okay, I agree with
That, I think to emphasize something like that is missing the point of Solaris.
Yeah.
I mean, and in a way, some of the idealizing of Lubitsch that's gone on here, I think, is missing the point. Lubitsch was human. He was a creature of his time, as we are of ours, and we feel, oh wow, back then they thought this or that. I mean, a century from now or less, people are going to look back at us and think, oh my God, they believed, you know. And this condescension to the ignorance of the past, that is when people weren't feminist, you know, and they're still around, people, you know, but they're disappearing. And we are here, and there's much about Solaris, I think, that it's not my favorite Tarkovsky movie, but there's much about it that is beautiful and fine and inspirational and okay. You know, he had these retrograde attitudes. And Lubitsch had plenty, I would say, of retrograde attitudes too. He was, and we don't, you know, I mean, people, I do this too when I write about filmmakers I love. You know, I don't want to write, if I'm writing now, I want to write about the things I don't like about him, and I think some of them are pretty serious. I think Le Diable Probablement is a ghastly film, and a morally dangerous one. But you know, but that's not what I want to write about, and it's not what I want to praise in him. But I can't ignore it, and I don't think we should ignore that the people we love, great artists, you know, we're also full of mistaken ideas, you know, as we know now in our wisdom and our unfailing rightness about what's going on.
I promise. But you know where we disagree? I'm here as a communist materialist, much more maybe for eternity than you. Isn't great art precisely, I'm quite naive metaphysical here, something that cannot be historically just specified? The greatness of Shakespeare is not only, I don't agree, to understand Shakespeare you have to study English history. The miracle of Shakespeare is he was revived in Romanticism. Every epoch reinvented its own Shakespeare. Right. So the great art is precisely this idea of, and not only this, you know where historicism is wrong. And here I agree with that critical point, but in a different way about Lubitsch of his time. It's not that to understand Lubitsch, you have to know German history. It's the opposite. The best way to understand our history is to see a Lubitsch movie, and so on. I'm here quite a naive believer in art. There is this naive element of eternity in art. For example, even Wagner, you can't downplay it. The wound of Parsifal is really syphilis, whatever, all that. I don't care. There is something in the content of Parsifal which almost makes it eternal. It can be real, and I'm sure that Lubitsch will survive.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's not, I'm not talking about his stories. I'm talking about our complacency as viewers, especially as informed viewers, as ambitious viewers. We are congratulating on ourselves by congratulating ourselves in comparison to those people who were wrong in the past. People, of course, we're wrong now about something important as they were in the past. And all art, the greatest art, and I think Parsifal is a great work, you know, is wrong about a lot. And so made by a human being. I mean, to put a dumb point on it. An obvious point.
Okay.
And to get fixated by what Lubitsch got right, and to ignore. I don't mean I want to talk about Lubitsch's biases, which belong to his time. And as I said to you before, Slavoj, he played the game, and of capitalist achievement. in a capitalist system and in a spherically controlled system in the movies. You couldn't play that game if you were going to be cynical about it, entirely cynical about it. You know, you had to go along with it, and he made movies that are sincerely felt, and not everything in them strikes us as right, but okay. What else is new? That's the way it is. But I mean, the thing that Lubitsch did that seemed important to me now more so than it had before is the kind of the way he sort of understands what's going on. He played the game and he understood the game. He didn't protest against the war in that early movie, but he understood the war in a way that could have been threatening to people who paid attention. And that's what he did. He played the game, he understood the game, and he let us know different important things about it, for which we are grateful and impressed.
Okay, I think if we continue with opening the floor to the audience and hear some more reactions to the conference. Are there any more questions, comments?
I have a question for James. In the context of what you though agree that Lubitsch has some very daring positions on sexuality, on family, which today are lost in contemporary Hollywood. And basically, what is your stance on contemporary Hollywood comedy? I think it became a genre that is more or less a very conservative one, propagating very old-fashioned family values and so on. And if you see Lubitsch's movies, you get a totally different kind of comedy and a very, even, I mean, it appears fresh even to the eyes of contemporary audience, I believe. So how would you comment?
Contemporary romantic comedies, I don't go to them a lot, and when I do, I'm validated in my policy. But I don't think that they're not supportive of. If I understood you, Gila, they're not supportive of old-fashioned values. They're because the line now is we don't believe in those. You know, I mean, that's the right thing of our time. We're beyond them in some way. And I think the comedies, not to mention stand-up comedy, you know, is really very, you know, challenging, subversive, you know, celebrating. You know, we're shocked when some comedian loses his job because he masturbated in front of unwilling women. But he, the same comedian, I can testify, has been talking about his masturbation habits publicly over television for years. And then suddenly we find out, talking about it in his own name, he doesn't change his name or a character. And then we say, oh my God, you know, he does it, you know, and that's hypocritical. You know, I mean, I mean, the culture has I'm talking about pop culture in my country, you know, is really opened everything. And I think that's one reason we can blame the culture partly, if not importantly or centrally, for the president we have now, who can shock nobody, apparently nobody who counts in the way of his supporters. It's an extraordinary thing that's happened. And I think the movies, to the extent that they've departed from the reticence, the relative reticence and humanism of Lubitsch, have changed. They've changed badly, and you know. But then the whole culture has changed in that way, and it's part of what we congratulate ourselves on for, you know. Anyway, does that? I'm glad for the question.
Okay, any more reactions, questions, comments?
Or even questions to other participants. Ivana, Aaron, and so on. Don't forget them, because we have to, in the worst Stalinist way, we have to radically cut short. There were no debates today. Do you want to question yourself?
I have a question for myself.
Yeah.
I just wanted to continue, and I found
there in his office, but somehow I have never found a lot of Lubitsch elements in Wilder's films. I know Billy Wilder was a completely different director, but still, I mean, what kind of ways can we see Lubitsch in Wilder, but also, I think, that's the question, but also how, I mean, did Wilder stray away from
Wilder thought Lubitsch tradition, and other people did too. It's sort of a cliche now that he's in. I would argue, the real inheritor of the Lubitsch tradition and the best parts of it, and he knew himself to be, was Preston Sturges, who.
The final chapter, or do you have any other contenders from later time?
Not offhand. I can't. No, I haven't. But yeah, it's a. Anyway, I interviewed Billy Wilder at the end of his life, and he certainly. And I told him I didn't. As you know, Ivana and I have talked. I'm not a great fan of Billy Wilder's films, except for a few that are quite wonderful. But anyway, and he was he was a very sweet man, I thought, and. He complained about my cigar. I was smoking cigars at the time, and he gave me a Cuban cigar, which I'll never forget as a gesture. And he was very happy with my not asking him about his films. I said, I'm here to talk to you about Lubitsch. And I remember that he said, I never really got close to him. He said, I meant to, but I never really made it. And which was very nice, I thought, and generous. And I said, but you made a movie, which I remembered from the past then, called The Emperor Waltz, with Bing Crosby and Joan Fontaine in color, with songs, of course, for Crosby. It was about a traveling salesman, an American coming to Eurytania and visiting his castle with a princess in it, and it's a Lubitsch scenario in a way. Except with the emphasis on Americanism in the hero. And I said, well, that was very Lubitchian. He said, no, he says it didn't come close. So I think Wilder's respect for Lubitsch and his modesty about his own work was very clear. Now, Preston Sturges, I think, would not have been so modest if you had. I never met Preston Sturges, but if you had brought up Lubitsch to him, I would imagine that he would claim the mantle. There are overt tributes to Lubitsch by name in some of his movies, which is, Wilder never did that. He never claimed the Lubitsch heritage as Sturges did. And I think they were both right. Wilder never, for me, but I know I'm very much a minority, but Wilder never had the humanity, the human, for me. And I like him at his best when he's frank about that in his movies, like Double Indemnity or Ace in the Hole. He just frankly, these people are awful. No Lubitsch touch is going to redeem them. I think people are too disliked.
Can I, very brief one. And to you, you did show the clip from Clooney Brown when Charles Boyer explains to her what is true love, that ship on a storm and so on, but I already mentioned this to you. Yes. I was so disgusted there by the patronizing attitude of Charles Boyer. He's so arrogant. He treats her as an ignorant, blind woman, and he has to explain it to her. And here I maybe disagree with you. Do you really think that he fits this role? I think for me, we disagree here. The main weakness of Clooney Brown is Charles Boyer. Did you feel the arrogance of how, Clooney, this will be love? Who is he to talk like that, my God? I mean,
She stops him short by saying, I'm glad you like him. Which is completely disarming, completely dismantling.
As a criticism.
But that only only underlines her inferiority. I mean, that she completely...
No, but it also dismantles him completely.
Yeah, he stops talking then.
Yeah.
She has her desire. He steps away for a little while.
Yeah, but nonetheless, then he has this strategy to educate her that at the end she will. And at that point, how is the disgusting guy called the other man, Wilson?
Yeah.
I was absolutely on the side of Wilson there. But okay, I don't.
It's true that there is this idea. I mean, I've just speak because I've written on the movie. There is this idea that he knows for her. I mean, there is this idea that Charles Boyer knows better than her what she wants. This is difficult to deny. But then the movie, the reason why I really like it, how far it goes on supporting her in this completely other desire that he doesn't get or thinks that he knows better. So far, actually, that then you have this final scene, which is okay. It's a kind of leads to the happy ending, but which is also a kind of deus ex machina because I mean, she literally enters the train without even there is no psychological realization of, oh, this is the man that I really love, or oh, I was so wrong about the other. She just enters the train like, I mean, this is just a kind of a extremely strange but wonderful scene, and then she's on this other train. Okay, now I will do some plumbing and so on. But it is not. She never really subjectivizes the Charles Boyer character. She just discovers that okay, her drive can go on, perhaps even better with the other guy. But it's not this kind of romantic realization of what she really wanted. There, she never concedes to him. Now that I know that it's you that I want. I just, I mean, this is a very interesting moment. I think at the end of the movie.
Also, he starts completely to serve her. And he goes on and writes bestsellers instead of writing some theory or whatever.
Instead of fascism, no?
Yeah, exactly.
Was it supposed to be an anti-fascist film? This simply disappears. They are a rich couple in America.
In the Marjorie Sharp book, he's much more of a serious fascist fighter, right, Alenka? As I recall the book, yeah. Yeah, he's more a glamorous hero than Charles. But I think the reason I don't disagree, Slavoj, with what you say about the implicit condescension. Yeah, no, it's there, but I see it differently, not differently. I can see what you're talking about, but on the other hand, for me, Boyer is such a magnetic figure, and he is a man without a home, and I think he's very much a sort of projection of Lubitsch himself. It's the last important film Lubitsch made in that way.
But like him in Gaslight, he's evil.
Well, he's a sponger. He's getting by. He's playing the game, as I said. I mean, he's stuck, as we are all stuck in our human situation, our worldly situations. And Lubitsch and the film has great sympathy for him because he's doing this. The young men who want to save him from the fascists say, could we take you somewhere where you'd be safe? And he says, the Ritz. The Ritz seems to me like that is the super expensive, luxurious hotel. Seems to me like a safe place. You know, and he's always, like Lubitsch heroes throughout the films, he has an angle and he's pursuing it in spite of whatever beneficent or salvific feelings he may be undergoing, like love. And he's a man without a home. He's a man who's lost his country. And the movie loses him as a hero at the end. But, yeah. Okay, but that's okay. Why not?
To conclude, sorry, Mladen, at a higher point, yes.
In America, where a best-selling book is all important.
Because we are at the end. Could you maybe to conclude say, like, you don't like, I also find France, that remake. No. Can you see, and there is that horrible remake which should be publicly burned. I especially say this in Berlin with Goebbels when you've got me. Do you see any possibility of how to remake Lubitsch? How to continue today?
We've got him. And people should be doing different things. You know, more appropriate to our time. then why remake Lubitsch? You know, I think, well, I mean, the urgent things for us in America now, the people, I mean, are the defiance of the reality, of truth, and the acceptance of that. I mean, not to speak, what's happening to the planet. I mean, and what's happening, and what is being done to us by the corporate powers who control our lives, unquestionably. Though we don't think about that. We think we're a democracy, you know, but then there's other places. But we are not a functioning democracy in America. We're under control of an ignorant minority who hates us, the rest of us, for saying or knowing that they're ignorant. And that is a terrible situation. We are all, thanks partly and importantly to the internet, we are all more and more in our own bubbles, living in our own neighborhoods with our own kinds of people who agree with us about Trump. In my neighborhood, there's no question about it. I don't wonder about what people think about Trump if I want to say something. I know. I mean, it's just, that's how it is. And then the people I grew up with in Chicago and South Dakota long ago, I mean, I know what they would think too, if they were around now. And I mean, this populism is turned sour and dangerous for the whole country and other countries as well. People withdraw into their positions, they email each other, they talk to each other on Facebook, the people they know that will agree with them, and it's dreadful, it is dangerous. And I don't know, and nobody in America that I know of knows the solution to this. But Timothy Snyder, who's written a very important small book, a Yale historian, on tyranny, he says, the lessons we can learn from the 20th century to apply to our own time. And of course, it's all a book about the Trump phenomenon and what he's achieved in America, and goes on. And one of the things he says, stay off the internet. And look, meet people, make small talk with them, look them, and this was important to him, and he's no idiot. Look them in the eye. Look them in the eye. And instead of, you know, going on the internet or on Facebook and so on, meet people and make personal encounters personal. This is so important. We have to talk to each other. We cannot, in countries like ours, we cannot just push them off. We cannot just talk to the people we know are going to echo what we're saying and thinking. That way lies disaster, as far as I can see. You know, it has to be different. It has to be different. And to say, as I heard someone say, a speaker recently, that Trump is a mask, he's not human. He's human. God help us, he's human. Yes, he is human. And he's human and like us. I mean, there are things in that monster, I agree, that we should recognize because we are all carriers of imperfection and ignorance and prejudice and in love with our own opinions, in love with our own... I'm done. It's crucial, it's important, we should all be afraid, and do something about it.
But I'm here to draw a Lubitsch lesson from this. The problem is that Trump is too much, you know, it all began, the evil with how was that called, Strasbourg Theater, Marlon Brando. You know, this, when you act, do your real self, you know, and then you get Trump, you know. Maybe we need a proper alienation to know how to wear masks and so on. Actor Studio is, for me, the origin of Trump phenomenon. And we need politeness, manners to learn how to wear masks.
You want to have one more? Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But how much this is true? What you are saying
now
regarding Lubitsch, looking at Madame du Barry.
Ah.
I don't know the movie.
Okay, you have a composure in the expression of the actor, which is absolutely fascinating. The way they picture. They show in their body expression. It's a little like, like stereotypical, a little bit like what happens in Indian theater. And you're so right. And there is, you know, I think in France we have a word for these things you're talking about. It's called courtesy. So the courtesy of the sentiment was present in this type of acting. But the courtesy of the sentiment of the other is no longer there, starting with Stanislavski, because now you only look, the other is like, okay, actually you look at yourself as your own part.
I agree.
I think we are reaching the end. I would like to thank all the participants, the audience which was keeping with us, and who was the person who organized it all, and Ivana. So, Timothy, Timothy, you want to have a last word, or I mean? No, you started. You made.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'm just very, very thankful. I couldn't have never dreamed that would came true without Ivana and Alenka. I met in Ljubljana. I kind of totally, were dependent on your work that you did so many years. I would never think that Ljubljana would be a kind of a mainland of Lubitsch, and it's not Berlin. And I think in my further career, I want to make a little bit, equalize it a little bit, so that Ljubljana and Berlin can get further on. And I'm dreaming about, maybe I even mentioned it to Ivana, maybe doing it again next year, and the same but different. Thank you.
Out, no? Yeah.